2 numbers. That was all it needed to put an end to a political conflict that had been simmering within USUSA basketball for more than a year. 22. There will be no compromise with the veterans. The locker room was not surveyed. There was no committee meeting where the old guard could voice their opinions. By making the call and giving Caitlin Clark her jersey, the coaching staff conveyed a message to every member of the program that needed no translation at all. The fact that the coaching staff wasn't the only one who made that choice is something that the majority of journalists covering this story failed to mention. It had a company signature on it, one that has greater significance in professional sports than any seniority system could. This is more than simply a jersey number tale. This is a tale about wealth, power, and what occurs when an organization attempts to humble someone who proves to be untouchable. Stay tuned because we're just getting started, and this topic goes deeper than anything you've seen discussed before. You had to go back to the time the fracture first surfaced, when Caitlin Clark's name wasn't on the Paris Olympic list, in order to comprehend what that number means today. The administrators of USA Basketball started. Basketball arrived with justifications. They discussed chemistry. The physicality of international competition was a topic of discussion. They make reference to the fact that even the most gifted players occasionally have to wait their turn, basketball turn, the significance of fitting into an established system, and the relevance of experience on the largest stages. If you didn't examine the system too closely, those explanations seemed almost plausible at first. Nearly. Because what a large segment of the basketball community previously thought has subsequently been validated by sources close to the program. Basketball had very little to do with the actual calculations taking place behind those closed doors. The program's old guard wanted to make a very clear statement. They held that influence at the upper level is not always acquired through cultural popularity. Even though no one was ready to express it out at the time, the reasoning was simple. Demonstrate to the league's new face that access is still controlled by the establishment. Either make it or wait. Before the power dynamic moves too far in a way that unnerves the veterans, adjust it. Show that no matter how many casual admirers suddenly know your name, seniority still rules the room. When all the basketball jargon is removed, the intention is to humble her. What followed turned out to be one of the most stunning institutional backfires in sports history. Not only in women's basketball, but also in all sports. Caitlin Clark was at home accomplishing something the women's game had truly never seen on the scale, while Team USA was in Paris winning gold medals in front of audiences that resembled Tuesday night preseason games more than Olympic competitions. In cities where the local team had never even approached a sellout, she was selling out WNBA arenas. Not only did she exceed the league's previous records for television viewing, but she also completely broke the ceiling, forcing analysts to reevaluate their entire conception of what women's basketball might bring in financially. Products were being sold more quickly than supply chains could physically replenish them. All of a sudden, casual fans, those who had never previously made time on their calendars for a women's basketball game, were planning their entire schedules around the Indiana Fever. The change in culture was not gradual. Building wasn't slow. It was enormous and happened right away. It was also impossible to turn away from. More than anything else, the stats convey that story. The 2024 season saw WNBA viewership reach levels never seen in the league's existence. Attendance at Indiana Fever games was surpassing not only WNBA records, but also goals that the majority of sports media analysts had dismissed as unachievable for women's professional basketball. By a non-competitive margin, the Fever emerged as the league's most viewed team. Home supporters outnumbered locals due to Clark-driven crowds at rival arenas and road games. Consider the implications of that. To see her perform, fans were going to opposite cities. Clark was transforming away games into cultural spectacles in a league where road attendance had traditionally been an afterthought. The quantity of products was similarly astounding. Her jersey sold at a rate that was unprecedented in the WNBA and directly challenged the best-selling jerseys in men's professional sports. Products could not be kept on shelves by retailers. The supply chain was clearly having trouble keeping up, as it had never been designed to manage this kind of demand for a women's basketball player. From across the Atlantic, USA Basketball was observing everything in real time. Additionally, those in charge of the program's financial models, those in charge of sponsorship income, broadcast agreements, and long-term commercial viability, were compelled to engage in a discussion that no one in the organization wanted to have in public. This was more than a cultural error. It has to do with money. Furthermore, nothing in professional sports, regardless of level or organization, is fixed more quickly than a financial error. Nothing. Sources acquainted with the internal dynamics claim that the discussion that followed the Paris Games was not a cordial invitation from a position of institutional confidence. It wasn't a gentle reminder from a company that thought it had made the correct decision and just wanted to proceed. It was a genuine negotiation. And with every significant chip on the table, Caitlin Clark entered. The audience was there for her. In order to make the 2028 Los Angeles Olympics the kind of event that warrants the investment being made around it, she possessed the cultural momentum that the program sorely required. During her debut season, she statistically refuted every rationale put forth to keep her off the Paris roster in the first place. In assists, she led the fervor. She used basketball IQ, competitive spirit, and a passing range that opposition defenses just couldn't match to propel a team that was predicted for lottery territory into the postseason. Every field arena, every metric, and every highlight all pointed in the same way. Not only was the argument against her preparedness for elite competition undermined, it had been filed away, sealed, and preserved such that it could never be legitimately opened again. She also brought one more piece of leverage into that room on top of everything else. Even while it might be the single most important aspect in everything that has happened since, it is one that the basketball debate consistently underplays. Additionally, there is a logo on that element. According to every reliable source in the sports industry, Nike's investment in Caitlin Clark is among the biggest athlete endorsement deals in women's sports history. The size of the brand architecture Nike has constructed around her makes it impossible to downplay the investment, even though the precise figures aren't fully disclosed to the public. According to reports, her Nike contract is among the most lucrative endorsement deals ever inked by a female athlete. It's also easier to trust the number when you consider what Nike has really constructed around her name. Programs for global marketing that operate concurrently on several continents. Retail initiatives in numerous markets. According to the majority of sports business specialists, this merchandise ecosystem operates at a 9-figure scale every year. Distinctive products at various price points that are intended to appeal to all segments of a customer base that was non-existent 3 years ago. Infrastructure for brand identification that required years of planning, a significant financial outlay, and a long-term wager on an athlete's capacity to maintain and expand her cultural influence. And at the heart of it all is the number 22, which is printed on every campaign that runs in every market, sewn into every piece of product bearing her name and image, and ingrained into the logo itself. In the same way that some athletes like a lucky number, Caitlin Clark does not favor that number. Her registered brand identification is this. When she was at Iowa, the number that was associated with her name changed the NCAA scoring record and elevated women's collegiate basketball to a whole new cultural level. Nike's design team spent months integrating this number into their visual identity systems. The marketing team at Nike based their campaign architecture on this figure. Nike's worldwide retail business incorporates this figure into product lines that are shipped to numerous nations. Putting that athlete on the biggest stage in the world in a different number makes absolutely no business sense when a company of Nike's size and financial sophistication invests that much in a single athlete and incorporates that number into campaigns that reach audiences in markets all over the world. Nothing. The discussion within USA Basketball was probably not very lengthy because the financial reasoning behind keeping number 22 in every situation in which Caitlin Clark appears in public is so clear-cut. The individuals who had a 9-figure financial stake in that particular number ensured it accompanied them. That isn't conjecture. That isn't a conspiracy theory. That's just the way corporate sports partnerships work when the investment is significant enough for those whose sole responsibility is to safeguard it. The number was verified by the coaching staff, but it's important to remember who was present when the choice was taken and whose interests influenced the result. Because it reframes the entire jersey issue, Nike's larger strategic move here is worthwhile to comprehend. The business has been closely observing women's basketball's growth trajectory with the same analytical fervor that it applies to whatever market it has chosen to control. Over the past 2 years, the WNBA's commercial expansion has been the kind of growth story that alters how big businesses distribute their resources. Organizations with financial exposure to a player's brand do not sit back and wait for the appropriate decision-makers in sports governance to make the right choice when viewership triples, merchandise demand exceeds supply, and a single player is driving those numbers at a scale no one anticipated. They take part. Through the means accessible to organizations of their size and power, they express their opinions. And the outcome of that involvement is a number 22 jersey hanging in a Team USA locker room, preparing for the biggest women's basketball stage ever put together. This is the reason why the jersey confirmation in that locker room is so politically significant. Because the individuals who live there on a daily basis do not operate financial models, even when the business logic appears to be flawless from the outside. They are competitors and athletes who have built their careers on a very particular knowledge of how respect and recognition are acquired inside elite programs. There are players in that Team USA locker room right now who have spent 10 years competing for roster spots in foreign leagues in nations that most casual fans couldn't find on a map, winning gold medals in arenas that hardly covered their own operating costs, and fighting for roster spots that paid a fraction of what their talent was worth. They fulfilled all of the program's requirements. They agreed to the schedule that the program established. They respected the seniority system because they had a reasonable expectation that it would someday return the favor. Subsequently, they witnessed a second-year professional player enter the program and receive, in a single administrative decision, what 10 years of service often entails in programs such as this one. Vague allusions to locker room tension fail to convey the reality of what has been occurring, so let's be clear about what that friction looks like in practice. The severe infractions. The tempo and intensity at which Clark absorbed physical contact during her debut WNBA season caused officials, analysts, and fans to seriously discuss the boundary between competitive defense and something more calculated. A number of occurrences exceeded what is normally allowed under the unwritten rules of the game while dealing with a rookie. Suddenly, veteran guys who were known for their physical defense were almost solely using that physicality on Clark. The pattern could not be written off as a coincidence because it was specific and consistent enough. Television coverage of WNBA games has advanced to the point where secondary camera coverage now captures what viewers were previously unable to see. Expressions amongst teammates during timeouts, reactions on the bench, and the times in between plays when the competitive mask slips and something more raw emerges. Clip accounts spent weeks examining some of the footage captured by those cameras during Clark's rookie season. The notion that the transition was proceeding smoothly behind the scenes was not enhanced by any of it. The media makes remarks. In order to raise what they characterized as analytical issues regarding Clark's impact, several veterans who were well-known and credible enough to have their views matter elected to participate in podcast appearances and media availability sessions. Did her stats represent a mechanism intended to increase her prominence, or were they the result of true top skill? Was the amount of cultural attention she was getting commensurate with her real basketball contributions, or was it exaggerated by circumstances unrelated to her actions on the court? These weren't abstract inquiries. They were questioned by individuals whose names were well known within the program and who had established their credentials through years of fierce competition. They were questioned during the particular period when the institutional power balance was most precarious and the Paris exclusion discussion was at its most recent. Those indications weren't accidents. No matter how symbolically significant a jersey number assignment is, none of them were misinterpreted, and none of them vanished. This is the problem, though. The number was publicly verified by the coaching staff. In any case, that confirmation is a clear message in and of itself. It provides you with specific information on the conversations that have previously occurred behind closed doors as well as the outcomes of those conversations. Someone has drawn a line. The program has made its direction between now and 2028 as clear as possible. Join the group or risk being left behind. And no one in that locker room, no matter how they feel about it, can really refute the statistical case for joining. This is the point at which the media's involvement in all of this merits an honest accounting. Because the media's portrayal of Caitlin Clark over the past 2 years hasn't been an impartial reflection of what happened as it happened. It has actively contributed to the narrative's development, though not always in ways that were consistent with the evidence. When Clark was setting records at Iowa that no player in college basketball history, either men's or women's, had ever matched, a sizable portion of the sports media infrastructure responded with a persistent attempt to qualify, contextualize, and, in certain situations, actively downplay what was happening rather than with straightforward coverage of a historic accomplishment. The claims that her stats were exaggerated by a system built around her abilities in ways that wouldn't apply to the professional level, the discussions at the competition level, and the conference strength debates. The amount of it, the consistency of it, and the particular framing choices that kept coming up across publications that don't usually coordinate their coverage painted a different tale. All of it was presented as analytical rigor, and some of it in isolation resembled serious basketball discourse. The institution felt uneasy about what Clark stood for. A player who didn't conform to the preconceived notion of what it meant to be a women's basketball star was attracting attention that may upend the sport's entire cultural structure. Additionally, parts of the media ecosystem had a stake in delaying this rearrangement because they had established their credibility around the current structure. The most illuminating aspect of the whole dynamic was the reportage of the Paris exclusion. The official reasons of chemistry, experience, and system fit were widely accepted and promoted by the mainstream sports media when the roster was revealed sans Clark's name. Sources closer to the case were already providing detailed accounts of the financial and political undertones, but very few publications focused on them. The questions that ought to have taken center stage. Regarding the impact of Clark's removal on the program's commercial trajectory, the power relations between seasoned veterans and a player whose cultural impact was already greater than any of theirs, and the reasons behind the exclusion. Most of those inquiries went unanswered. Then the season arrived, the arenas filled, the goods sold out, and the figures started to come in. Additionally, the same media outlets that had spent months carefully controlling the narrative surrounding Clark's preparedness were forced to cover a story that fully addressed all of the concerns they had been voicing. In real time, the recalibration has been visible. The tone has changed. The way it is framed has shifted. However, the original coverage's credibility cost still exists, and it belongs to the particular voices that decided to spend a year doubting something that the evidence previously addressed. These voices are now in the front row. A new narrative has taken the place of the one they contributed to. The evidence is the jersey that is displayed in that locker room. In her debut campaign, Clark led the Indiana Fever in assists. She shattered records that analysts had honestly thought would last for years. Through a mix of basketball IQ, unwavering competitive intensity, and a passing range that presented defenders with issues for which there was no dependable solution, she brought a team that was at the bottom of the league's competitive spectrum into postseason games. However, since the headline figures only provide a portion of the picture, let's delve deeper. By any fair historical standard, Clark's ability to perform as a major playmaker at the WNBA level as a rookie was remarkable. From the first few weeks of her first professional season, Clark was constantly demonstrating the court vision, defensive read recognition, and positional decision-making that point guards normally need several seasons to achieve. The speed at which information is processed, the capacity to see weaknesses in the defense before the play starts, and the ability to deliver the ball at the appropriate time and place at the appropriate pace. Veteran players spend years honing that talent. It was practically complete when Clark got there. Opposing defenses faced a different kind of challenge because of her shooting range. The opposition team's entire defensive setup must change when a player can legitimately threaten the hoop from distances that most defenders have been taught not to respect. Help rotations that typically operate dependably malfunction. When facing someone with Clark's release speed and consistency from range, closeouts that would be easy against most players become risky wagers. Driving lanes were made unavailable by defenses dedicated to preventing her passing. The three-point line was made available by defenses that made a commitment to stop her driving. There was no simple solution. There isn't one yet. The question of whether she should compete at the top international level is still up for debate. It has been resolved, recorded, examined, and stored. Serious basketball fans are no longer willing to discuss it in public. The biggest stage women's basketball has ever had on American soil is the 2028 Olympics in Los Angeles. The coaching staff is not rewarding seniority for its own sake or constructing a roster based on legacy. They are focusing on what yields the strongest outcome in front of the largest possible audience. The person they have selected to be the focal point of their attacking strategy causes fundamental issues for rival teams that no strategy has been able to consistently resolve. Put Clark in charge of the USA team's offensive. Encircle her with Breanna Stewart, one of the most versatile forwards the world has ever seen, and A'ja Wilson, who is currently perhaps the most formidable post presence in the international game. It takes more than just a basketball team for Clark to read defensive coverage at the top of the key, spot the mismatch, and pass the ball to Wilson or Stewart in precisely the ideal spot to cause damage. It's a systematic issue. Opposing coaching staffs are disturbed by this type of offensive design because there isn't a clear defensive response. Every change you make to keep Clark in check gives Wilson or Stewart an advantage. Every resource you devote to slowing down Wilson or Stewart gives Clark room to operate, which she will penalize without hesitation. The brilliance surrounding Clark improves her, while Clark's presence significantly increases the risk of the talent surrounding her. The program is currently working toward that combination on home turf in front of the biggest women's basketball crowd ever gathered. And what it generates in Los Angeles might be the pivotal point in the women's game's history. Students have witnessed such transitions in the past. The transition from Magic Johnson and Larry Bird to Michael Jordan during the Dream Team era was not an easy one. There were egos at play. There was actual friction. The unquestionable direction the game was taking collided sharply with competitive pride. Whether they were prepared to accept it or not, players who had defined an era were grappling with the fact that a new era had already begun. It was truly hard for veterans who had gained everything the sport had to provide to comprehend that someone else was now the focal point of the business they had dedicated their careers to. There was actual friction. It was not comfy. Everyone involved in such programs felt it in ways that weren't always apparent to the general public. However, it was essential. It was the cost of making the change. The most powerful prolonged run in basketball history was what came out on the other side of it. Right now, the women's game is experiencing its own version of that very moment. The situation is not the same. It's a separate sport. There are differences in the particular dynamics and stresses. However, the basic structure of what is taking place, a generational shift that the old guard neither chose nor controlled, is precisely the same, unfolding in real time with all the opposition and friction that such shifts invariably bring. Like all previous generational transitions, this one will be evaluated based on what is produced at the end rather than how comfortable the journey was. The flag buried in the ground is represented by the number on that shirt. The official institutional proclamation that the period has shifted. Every voice that openly denigrated Clark's legitimacy over the past year in podcast episodes and comment sections, including those whose names were precise and intentional enough to jeopardize their own credibility, now has a front-row ticket to the response they received. Number 22 is now positioned globally as a symbol of American basketball's future by the same media infrastructure that spent a year meticulously crafting the story and debating whether she was truly that essential. That irony is not insignificant. That represents a total institutional reversal. And in a sport that has a very long memory for who said what and when, everyone who took part in creating the alternative story will have to deal with it in public. Clark is under a lot of strain in this. Capacity. If someone tells you otherwise, they are not being honest with you. The story machine won't stop if Team USA falters at any time between now and the podium in Los Angeles. It will move quickly and forcefully. On the way down, the same infrastructure that questioned her on the way up will be prepared to pronounce her overrated. That is the reality of being in her current role. However, every level of this sport has seen the same outcome, from the footage of Caitlin Clark performing under duress. From high school to the most closely watched rookie season in women's basketball history, the concentration gets sharper as the moment gets bigger. Under pressure, she doesn't shrink. She grows. In every program she has ever participated in, she has been the main attraction. And no matter the stakes, the scrutiny, or the particulars of the opposition in front of her, that pattern has never once broken. The institution as a whole was forced to follow the schedule of a player who was instructed to wait and whose timeline will be set by the establishment. Without institutional support, a seat at the table, or the support of the veterans whose permission the system insisted she obtain first, she accomplished it in a single year. She accomplished this by packing arenas, shattering records, and putting on a debut season that, in hindsight, made every criticism of her seem not just incorrect but embarrassing. The number she had on at Iowa. Nike developed a 9-figure brand environment around this number. The number that just put an end to a political dispute within USA Basketball. When the attention of the sports world shifts to Los Angeles in 2028, that number will represent this nation on the international front. The detractors have stopped speaking. The skeptics are adjusting. The institutional wager has been made formally and openly. And if we learned anything during the past year, it was this. The worst investment anyone has ever made in this sport is to wager against Caitlin Clark. The establishment made an effort to remove her from the narrative. Rather, she turned to the narrative. And in 2028, she will finish in front of the largest crowd in women's basketball history.